This is My First Job in Sports web series, presented by SBR Net, your comprehensive source for sports data to the academic community. Here are the hosts of My First Job in Sports, Neil Schwartz and Dr. Lindsay Darvin.
Welcome to My First Job in Sports, the show that provides a little inspiration, motivation, navigation, and I even added an extra TION on this one, education. I'd like to welcome, of course, my co-host, Dr. Lindsay Darvin, assistant professor at the Falk School, Syracuse University. Lindsay, I know over the last few weeks you have been an incredibly busy woman. Women's sports, so much going on. Talk a little bit about what you're doing right now.
So much going on. So the most recent would be last week on Thursday. So a week ago exactly, I was at the ESPNW Summit NYC, which takes place in Brooklyn. So that was just an incredible experience. I heard from some amazing women in the sport media space. Ali Krieger was there. She did a great job. She's going to be sort of the face of ESPN soccer moving forward, which is pretty cool. So I got to hear from her. But I've never been to one before. I was invited through the work that I do with Forbes and some of the research that I'm doing. So they paid for me to go. So that was pretty nice. And we got I've got my swag bag over here. But I mean, it was cool to be there for this ESPNW Summit. I've wanted to go for years now. They've had 19 up to this point. I didn't even realize that this was the 19th. Wow. But it's just a cool moment in women's sports, right? So they spoke a lot about the Caitlin Clark effect. They spoke a lot about the viewership numbers, fandom across the board. So it was a really empowering day, which was pretty cool.
You know, speaking of the article that you just wrote for Forbes and the work you do for Forbes, you and I just collaborated a little bit on an article. We were able to provide some background data, which of course, we love to do. But talk a little bit about the piece that you just wrote for Forbes Sports Money.
We're trying to prove that fans, basically, of the WNBA and of women's sports are good fans for sponsors to want to land with and hook up with, essentially. And that's what we wrote for Forbes, right? So we took the research that you've done through I think it was the 2023 sport fan survey. Sure. And we looked at sort of the tendencies of those fans of the WNBA. And they're more active on social media, which sponsors care about these days. So it's not to say that they're more active with WNBA social media platforms, but they're just more active on social media, period, which is incredibly important. And also they are more influenced by sponsors. So if they see a sponsor advertising for something, especially if it has to do with women's sports, we know this from other studies, they're more likely to make a purchase. So brands need to pay attention to this. Fans of women's sports are just built a little bit different, and there's a better potentially ROI with those fans.
When you're looking at targeting data for, fans and sponsors and things like that, a lot of times they say, oh, we'll get fans, coincidentally, or we'll just get fans as part of the, throwing the old pasta up on the wall effect. But it's not that way anymore. You really want to be able to, target specific groups of fans for specific products. But let me get into a couple other things. This time of year, we're usually talking about Stanley Cup playoffs, NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball season getting into full speed. But right now, those aren't the big topics we're hearing about. We're talking about the Netflix NFL deal. We're talking about, of course, the NFL schedule. We're talking about the start of the WNBA season and the Caitlin Clark effect. But there is something that kind of popped up the other day. Harrison Butker, the kicker of the Kansas City Chiefs, may have gotten himself in a little bit of hot water. Dr. Lindsay, want to talk about it a little bit?
I'm very passionate about this, Neil. So
I know you are.
I'm not going to reiterate because we don't want to give light to the things that he was talking about. But essentially, he was, trying to take women back however many years, probably 60, 70 years at this point. We forget the 1950s weren't 50 years ago, right? They were 70 years ago. And I think people forget about that. A lot of negative sentiments regarding LGBTQ plus individuals. I don't know why we gave this person a mic. I think that what people need to remember about sport is incredibly powerful, and athletes are role models in a particular segment, but they need to carry themselves a certain way. That role model placement is earned, right? You're not just automatically given that just because you can kick a football. You have to show that you deserve to be a leader in the space, and people should listen to you. And through what we heard from this particular kicker from the Chiefs, I don't believe that he belongs in that role model stature right now. So we haven't heard anything from the Chiefs, but I know I was incredibly disappointed to hear that someone in the sports world was given that kind of a platform and took it in the wrong way, because especially for young kids, they are role models. Kids all think they're going to go to the NFL, NBA, WNBA. So to have someone like that do that is pretty discouraging, but respect is earned even if you're a pro athlete, and he did not earn my respect, and he's lost a lot of respect from fans across the NFL for sure.
One of the things my friends, we were talking about it the other night, and they said, everybody, loves to yap about the First Amendment. We can say what we want and all that. And you know what? The First Amendment is not unconditional, and the First Amendment is not without some guardrails. You can't run into a theater and yell fire. You can't hold a protest on the street without getting a permit first. There are things that are just within the guardrails that must be maintained, and I think, Dr. Lindsay, you were right about it. Hey, before we get to our guest, Callie Franklin, Vice President of Human Resources for On Location. Over the last 2 weeks, we've had two, interesting guests. We had Alana Sullivan from High Point University, now working for, all of a sudden I can't remember,
for Learfield, yep.
And then we had
out of NC
Sam
State.
Kinsley.
Out of NC
from
State,
NC State, from the Wolfpack,
Yeah.
The Wolfpack group, marketing and all that. And the one thing that I caught from both of them, Dr. Lindsay, is the importance of internships. What do you talk about with your students on respect to internships?
Well, okay, so I'm not going to overage myself, and I'm not that old. My first experience trying to get a sport internship was sending letters. I printed out letters, I put it in the mail, I put a stamp on it, and I basically cold called through the mail trying to get an internship. So
you just aged yourself.
I did age myself a lot, didn't I? Because emails weren't accessible necessarily, right? You couldn't always get someone's email off of a staff directory back in the day. So it's incredibly important. Getting those experiences early on for me, even though they were once a day, twice a day, or once a week, twice a week. It wasn't something that was full time. Taught me things. I took something from each of the internships that I had, and students today, I think, are getting that. At Syracuse, I got to give a shout out to our students. I mean, most of my students get an internship. I see them post about it on LinkedIn all the time. They're freshmen, they're sophomores, and they're still getting these internships every single summer. So an important thing for other students who might be listening to these podcasts to know is your competition is across the country and across the world, right? So if you're not doing it, someone else is doing it. But I do want to give another plug, because in my freshman year, I worked at, my uncle owned a garden center, a patio furniture and garden center. And I actually worked there for that summer. I didn't have an internship. And I also learned a lot doing that. I learned a lot selling and working at a pizza place in college, so it's like you can gain experiences outside of an internship, but you want to make sure that you're blending a lot of these experiences together. So also get the job, the regular job, go work at the pizza place, go sell patio furniture. I was a salesperson for a couple months. But also get the internship, and you can do it during the school year. You can work in your athletics department. There are things that you can do that are not going to require a lot of effort on your part. But I'm telling you right now, the kids at Syracuse are doing it. So I'm giving a shout out to our students, because they're all getting those internships and they're working really hard.
For this show, we're going to be speaking with Callie Franklin, Vice President of Human Resources for On Location. She had worked for Arthur Blank, a well-known entrepreneur. Also, he's founder of Home Depot, owns the Atlanta Falcons, the Atlanta, I get it wrong again. What's the name of the Atlanta?
United.
Thank you. We're really excited to welcome Callie Franklin to My First Job in Sports. Callie, welcome.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Callie, I don't want to steal your thunder, because as I was reading your background, I have to say that it really brought a smile to my face for a lot of reasons. But so without stealing your thunder, Callie, like we like to start off, give us a little bit about your background and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Callie Franklin. I'm born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I am a Georgia girl through and through. I graduated from Georgia State. In undergrad, I went to University of Georgia for business school. And I've been in Georgia on and off for my professional career. I have a daughter, believe it or not. I am one of those advanced age mothers who had children in their 40s. I question that decision often, but I love my 2-year-old daughter. I'm married and I have 2 Cocker Spaniels. Spartacus is our first, and Zoe is Spartacus's companion. So they both live with us in Midtown Atlanta.
tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, because after this, we're going to go back up and talk a little bit about your career, because the one thing that really struck me when you and I first talked about, our event, Get in the Game, was how non-linear your particular situation was in terms of how you ended up kind of in the sports world. In fact, you ended up in an interesting spot, hospitality, tourism, kind of in that kind of vortex or crossover, so to speak. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and who you're working for.
Absolutely. So I work for On Location. I feel like I live there sometimes too. Uh, but I lead the HR function for On Location. So On Location is an experiential company. A lot of people would be familiar with us and the wraparound services that we offer at events. So if you want to be in the know, if you want to be in the building at some of the world's largest events, On Location can take you there. And that's the exciting part about what we do is we are sports adjacent. We are entertainment adjacent, but we provide experiences for people of all ages and all demographics. So I've been with the company for going on 2 years, and I have just found it as a culmination of all of the experiences that I've had. As you mentioned, I didn't start in sports. So I ended up in sports, and now I'm slightly adjacent in the hospitality experiential space.
Where'd you start out your career?
Well, like many of your listeners, probably, retail. People always want to talk not as favorably about the retail background, but those of us who have worked in retail know that it provides the amazing foundation to just understand business, understand customers, understand that you have to show up, you have to be personable, the importance of relationships. And that's where I started. So it was first out of college with a family owned business. I will admit, I didn't stress my senior year about a job because I was fortunate enough to be able to join my family's airport concessions business.
Wow.
In the Atlanta airport back in the early 2000s.
Wait a minute. I've spent probably some percentage of my life in that airport over the years. Okay, tell us. What was the location? Which terminal were you at? I mean, I need to hear some details here.
So we had locations throughout the Atlanta airport. We had newsstands and specialty stores. We were right at the A-spine, which there's now a Mac store that sits there.
I think I know what it is.
Yep. At one point, that was a body shop. And we used to sell the body shop products in that location. And we had a cologne perfume store, a specialty novelty store. But talk about a fast-paced environment. It's similar, like we talk about retail and how you get it all in a retail environment. Airport retail is a whole different experience.
Well, and that would be kind of people focused, right? So, I mean, that's so interesting that you would have done that working in customer service essentially, because I think what a lot of people forget in these industries is like it's people focused, right? So we're working with folks, we're interacting with people all the time, and not just people that we work with in an office space, but consumers, right? And customers. So how did some of those experiences kind of help shape where you are now in your career?
I draw from those experiences on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I remember graduating from college thinking, what in the world am I going to do with this sociology degree? I chose a major that was interesting. I enjoyed showing up for my classes. I enjoyed the discussions, conversations about deviance, conversations about, relationships and behaviors. And I remember thinking, I don't want to teach. I don't want to be a researcher. What am I going to do? And I fell into HR, which is exactly a culmination of all of those different focuses and areas. And then you take that to the world's busiest airport, and it allows you to just look at behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a bone to pick. So you're a Georgia person. I went to the University of Florida for my PhD. So I've got to get the Gators in there a little bit and say, go Gators. But that's so fascinating. I'm so curious to learn a little bit more about sort of your day to day with On Location and the things that you're involved in. If you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, most people are not familiar with what an HR function truly does. When you ask the average person about HR, they think about payroll, they think about benefits, they think about hiring and firing. And those things are absolutely a part of my day-to-day experiences. But ultimately, we are there to drive business results through people. So we have to help retain, we have to help train, we have to hold people accountable to make sure that the business results are even possible. Oftentimes in a C-suite, there are a lot of great ideas, but the people in the C-suite are very seldom the ones actually in the paint, in the game, making it happen.
It's interesting you talk about that because one of the expressions I use a lot is, where the rubber meets the road. And,
Mm.
it sounds like that really is, a great deal of the way you look at your function in HR as,
Absolutely.
you're there to provide the talent,
Mhm.
to be able to implement and, kind of put, rubber to concrete, if you know what I mean.
That is certainly the case. You often have the big ideas, and we have to sometimes break those ideas down into logical, tactical steps and transactional pieces. But then the part that people don't like to discuss is when we don't make results. We have to talk about that too. So I have found great success in just shooting straight with people. The HR function has a bad reputation for just covering things up and always driving the business agenda. And sometimes it's not sometimes, all the time, it's easier to just tell people what's going on. People want clarity.
Let's talk a little bit about the sports world and kind of your involvement with that. Let's say you're meeting with a group of students or you see a bunch of students and I think one of the things we talk about a lot is, sports tourism and how great a place it is to start your career in sports. Talk a little bit about how On Location presents a lot of those opportunities for students.
Well, we have a lot of opportunities for students in entry level positions. I mean, we are providing nuts to bolts, beginning to end experiences for our guests and our fans. So you're talking about sales positions, you're talking about communications positions, you're talking about um, interestingly enough, I told you we're in the experiential business. So we create experiences. So event planning, program management, all of those skills are important to us, as well as communicating out externally to the public about what we're doing. Because a lot of people just assume, hey, I want to go to Coachella. That sounds great. Most of the time, it's hard to find a ticket. And once you get a ticket, you can't find a hotel room. And then once you're at the hotel, you don't know how to get to the venue. We provide experiences that wrap all of those services up and allow you to purchase one package.
I'm listening to that. I'm thinking about the Fire Festival fiascos, right? Have we seen that Netflix documentary? Unless
Yeah.
any of us were there, I was not there personally, so I don't want to speak for anyone if they were there present. But that sounds like it to me. That's something that they didn't do, right? So I mean, I think that
Mhm.
that's so important too. We've had a lot of folks on the show, and I have experience in events and operations as well. But we've had a lot of folks that have a little bit of that experience so far in their
Mhm.
careers. I think it's a critical piece of the industry to get experience and exposure into, whether it's in sport or outside of it. Events and
Agree.
learning that side can help you in other spaces and other areas. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what is the importance of learning that side of the industry, really in any industry that you go into, but specifically maybe in the sport-ish space?
It normally boils down to that program management and understanding how to create a business plan and a program plan. Those two skills are things that most college students are doing anyway. You're in group projects where that has to be established. You have to understand what the goal is, who is your audience, what's the timeline, what are the expenses. These are all things that we oftentimes do in our personal lives as well as our collegiate lives that we just assume don't really matter. And in the professional world, businesses are making hand over foot, you know, profitability off of those exact skills. So I think that's one of the things I would implore with our younger um, workers is everything that you have been through to date has some value in the professional world. The question is, can you figure out how to translate that and how do you articulate that?
What are those skills, though? That when you talk to, let's say, a college student or you're meeting with college students. What are those skills that you are specifically looking for that will allow a candidate to somehow rise above the other candidates that you're talking to?
So you have your low hanging fruit, you have your just common expectations, time management, critical thinking. And sometimes critical thinking is underplayed is like, oh no, I think critically. No, critical thinking is problem solving. So no matter what business, no matter what sports entity, sports environment, or even corporate environment you go in, there are going to be problems. What do you do when faced with a problem? So all of those things are expected. But the outliers that I would talk to students about: courage, having courage to speak up, stand
Wow.
alone, and do what's right.
Wow.
It's hard, especially in a culture in this day and age that is, everyone wants to look, talk, act, and kind of do things alike. When you get in a professional environment, being able to demonstrate courage is super important. Um, Analytical skills. I say often, we have a lot of news reporters telling us what's going on, and it doesn't matter what channel, it's the same news, somebody just says it differently. Those analytical skills to be able to tell someone, what does the data say? What trends did you identify? Not what did you see? So I had someone once tell me, I don't need you to admire a problem. I need you to solve a problem. And I think sometimes we get stuck just admiring, like, wow, yeah, that's real bad. So, and the last one I would throw out there, though, is integrity. Integrity matters all of the time. And I know, cliche coming from HR, but those are the things when you're sitting in a room and talent decisions are being made, you don't want your reputation being questioned. You want people to know that you stand on strong values, personal values, not
Sure.
necessarily company values. And those are things that I think sometimes people just assume aren't valuable in the workplace.
Kind of going along those lines, what mistakes are you seeing students or recent graduates make when they're trying to land that first job or trying to get an internship experience? Like, what are they? I don't want to say they're doing it wrong, but what are things that they could probably improve upon, or what things are you seeing that they're not really doing the best or preparing themselves in the best ways for?
I was headed there.
Leading with fandom. I love sports. I've played soccer all my life, so therefore I should work for a soccer company.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was state champion, so therefore I need to be on your team. When in fact, those experiences are all very important and valuable. But it's not the fact that you did it, it's what did you learn from it? What obstacles did you encounter while on that team? Imagine being on that state championship basketball team. I'm sure there were some days or some games when everybody wasn't playing up to par. What did you do in those situations? So a lot of times we get students who are just so eager to be in sports. I'm in sports management. I majored in sports management, so therefore I need to be in the sports field. Doesn't necessarily add up.
No, I
No.
know. I mean, Dr. Lindsay, of course, was a student athlete, and and I think a lot of what you're saying probably resonates. What do you do when your teammates aren't you know participating or aren't playing their best or aren't doing the things that they
Absolutely.
need to be doing in order to put you into a winning situation? And you know what? Business is no different.
It's so true.
And this is something that we try to talk to our students about, because you're absolutely right. It's about those failures. Those are the things that really you can take those learning experiences away from playing or being involved in sport, maybe before you're a sport management major. But it's good to hear, because those are things that as faculty, we try to tell our students. We say, it's great that you're a fan, or it's great that you had those experiences playing, but that's not going to necessarily get you a leg up. You have to take something from that that's meaningful and be able to apply it in the business setting.
And a lot of time in the interview settings, we don't know that. And there's no opportunity for you to fully display that you're going to be an amazing employee. But I like to tell people to have a story. Who are you? When you show up for that interview, who are you? Now, mind you, I'm in my 40s and I'm still working on who I am. So I don't mean like the entire self exploration piece. I mean, what makes you different? What makes you stand out? It's one of the things, the best piece of advice I could give you for that is ask your friends to write down a few words to describe you. Not just one friend, a few friends. Hopefully you'll see some similarities. I'm reliable. I'm the friend that they call when something goes wrong. Those are kind of the stories of who you are. And when you show up for an interview, it's more important for those things to shine. I had a woman reach out to me, go dogs. She was from the University of Georgia, and she appealed to me on LinkedIn, and she made that immediate connection. Hey, I went to the business school and I was wondering if you had a few minutes. And I was expecting the fandom story. Instead, she told me a story how she recently lost her father, and He was a former football player, and she feels closest in environments where they, grew their relationship. So she wants to be in the sports environment. She also majored in sports management, but she wants to be in that sports environment because she remembers those experiences and she wants to help create them for other people. I'm like, now that's a story.
Sure.
Absolutely.
It's interesting you use the word story because I'm in the data side of the world, and with my analysts, my interns, and all that, I always say to them, look, anybody can pick out a data point, anybody can make a graph or a chart, but what is that chart telling you? What is that story? What is that story? And I have to say, Dr. Lindsay, in our last two shows, we spoke with Samantha Kinsley, of course, and then we spoke with Alana. And, both of them, I felt, told a great story about their, how they, got into sports and why they got into sports and what it meant to them. But you know what, Callie? There is something interesting. Your first job in sports was actually working for Arthur Blank. Is that correct?
It certainly was.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, let's talk about how I got there.
Okay.
I am that person who was not looking for the sports job. I was that person who enjoys consuming sports. I watch sports. I attend sporting events. I was at a pivotal career moment where I had thought I had reached success. I had worked in retail for several years, about 10 years at that moment, and I got a corporate role as a director. I was making better money than I had ever seen. It was a corporate environment. I got to dress up in a suit, and I got there and I thought, what have I done with my life? This is not where I want to be. And it required me to think about, what do I enjoy? And I reflected back on my previous experiences, and it was what you said, Dr. Lindsay. It was being people focused, and not just in the HR function, but being out with the people. So I saw a opportunity on LinkedIn, and I reached out to the recruiter and I told him my story. I said, I am not your traditional sports HR director, but this is who I am, and this is how I can influence in that capacity at this role. He reached out literally the next day.
Wow.
And said, wow.
So do I. I say wow too.
It was great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what's so interesting is going along with your nonlinear path. I feel that Neil and I, with some of our younger guests, it's more of us kind of telling them that that's probably going to be the case because they're not there yet, right? This is truly their first job, maybe ever, not only their first job in sports. So you just spoke to something that I think hits home with, I'm in my 30s. I have a lot of friends who have been in the corporate world or working in a certain position for X number of years, and they're kind of reaching that burnout phase a little bit. And that happens in sport too, right? Sport's a high pace environment, 7 days a week, sometimes 90 hours, right? What advice would you give to people who are kind of going through those different transitions in their lives? You've been through a few already, it sounds like, in terms of finding your passion, right? And taking that risk. Like, what does that feel like? And what are some of the things that you would tell people in terms of like looking out for that moment in their time of, I should transition, right? Like, this is okay.
I think that each experience kind of creates the story that we're talking about. And you might have a few experiences that create that. You might have many, but the reality is you have to know where you are. And once you figure out that these are the aspects of my job that are important to me. You mentioned sports, and completely true. Sports, nights, weekends, holidays, that's when sporting events occur, which means you're working adjacent hours to those sporting events. And you sometimes get to a point where you ask, is this really what I want to do? And it's okay. But the most important part is to think about the transferable skills. Everything that you're doing, each one of us in our current capacities can translate into another career, can translate into another functional area, another company. Now, it might not be as linear as you would expect, but I could argue that I could use the same people skills. I once told someone, oh, I'm not a salesperson. And they said, isn't that what you do all day? You sell the company, you hire talent, you have to sell them that the experiences, the working experience is value proposition and all of these things. And I said, you know what? It's so true.
It is so true. I have an expression, and my old boss actually sometimes used to hate when I said it, but I used to say, look, whether you're in customer service, whether you're in technical support, whether you're in, finance, whatever it is, everybody sells.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that everybody has to close sales, but
Mhm.
everybody sells. And if you have that attitude, you have that attitude where you're willing to listen to people and you're willing to, let them tell you their story, and then hopefully
Absolutely.
you can help them. Just real quickly though, the goal of my first job in sports, of course, is to provide a little motivation, a little inspiration, a little navigation. Well, here comes a little bit of education. For
Okay.
those of you that don't know who Arthur Blank is, he is probably, I would say, easily one of probably the richest men in America, but he is the owner of the Atlanta Falcons.
Hmm.
He is the owner of the Atlanta, what's the name of the MLS team? I forget.
United.
Thank you. He is he was the general, he was the also owner of Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, and he was one of the original founders of Home Depot. So, Callie talked a little bit about retail. Well, you know what? Arthur Blank knew a few things about retail. I think they have like 1,600 stores or some ridiculous number at this point. And of course, he's done amazingly well with his sports franchises. Callie, let's talk a little sports. So what are some of the most fun events you've been to over the years?
I've been to quite a few events, both in a work capacity and in a personal capacity. But I must say, the personal capacity events that I've attended are far stellar than the others. So I was lucky enough to go to the World Cup in
Wow.
2015 in
Wow.
Rio. Um, and my brother is a huge soccer fan, and he made it a family initiative for us to be there. So we actually saw France and Germany play. I
Wow.
remember it as if it was not 9 years ago. I went to the Olympics. Of course, I'm in Atlanta, but I also went to the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona and saw the
Wow.
Dream Team play.
Wow.
Yes, now I was sitting in the top of the arena, but I was in
You
the
were there.
house.
You were there.
Absolutely. But I mean, in a work capacity, I work with an organization that our largest event at the moment is the Super Bowl. We have the men's Final Four. We have the Masters. And I mean, these are our personal events, but these are events where we have experiences that we provide. So we have relationships with rights holders, and that's how we create the experience around. So those are all part of what makes me great in an HR capacity for a sports organization is I've actually been there. I've actually been to the events. I can tell you the experiences that people have. I was telling someone about the World Cup games in Atlanta. I said I was in Rio watching Brazil play on a beach, Copacabana Beach, with 100,000 people on a
Wow.
beach with a large just screen. There's just so much, fandom in those environments. So it definitely fuels the energy and excitement.
Have you been to any dud events, just out of curiosity?
Um, you know what people would say, dud? Like take for example the men's Final Four last year, where all of the top four teams fell out, and you had not all, but I mean you had number 10 and number 11 making it to the final. It was such an amazing environment to be in with people who never imagined they would be at a Final Four event. I mean, you had people who graduated in the 40s there. You had people who graduated last year. So I think it's hard for there to be a dud event.
I got you. Dr. Lindsay was at the women's Final Four of the National Collegiate
Sure.
Basketball, and she
It was.
talked glowingly about the experience.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
incredible. And I was out at, I think what was actually more exciting, I mean, the Final Four was incredible, but I was out in Albany for those games, the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight games. So I was there for the Iowa LSU game, kind of sitting courtside with media. So that was just such a cool experience. And I'm glad that you say that because I think that we obviously see the WNBA is coming up and NCAA women's basketball outpaced the men this year in terms of viewership numbers. And that's all incredible. But I think in the past, some people would have said women's sports are the dud events, right? But I mean, that's just absolutely incorrect. I don't know if you've been to any other like major women events that you've enjoyed.
I remember the Olympics. I remember women's volleyball. I think women's sports, unfortunately, have not gotten the attention that they deserve. It's so amazing to see women's basketball now. I remember sitting at a bar. I was at the Final Four, but everyone was at the bar watching the women's games, and probably more people there than at the men's game. So I think it's unfortunate. What I love about women's sports is just the commitment and the competition. Because there's not as much money in it, These women are out there playing their hearts out. This is reputation. This is like just wanting to make it happen and make a name for themselves, their families, and their schools. And I think sometimes men's sports gets diluted just by the excess money that's present, as you get a lot of prima donna behavior due to just the excess. You don't see that in women's sports.
So, Callie, what can a student coming out of school, let's say they're coming out as a senior, coming out as a grad student, what can they expect on their initial experience at On Location? What sorts of things can they expect, types of jobs? What sorts of things can they expect to be doing? And what types of things can they expect to learn?
I think the most important part is that we have something for anyone, period. We are a fully functioning company that has avenues that anyone can explore, from finance to, like I said, program management to production. So you talked about, Dr. Lindsay, just about being able to put on an event. We have production, so we have to produce the space that we invite our guests into. We have customer service. So when you buy tickets or experiences and something goes wrong, you have to call someone. We have HR, we have legal, we have communications, and we have opportunities from entry level all the way through management and or senior leadership positions. And because we're in the sports environment, we're growing all of the time. We're getting new rights holders. Our newest partnership is with the Olympics. Like, who would have thought that would have been an opportunity? So now for a student, and we have recently hired some recent college graduates who are working on providing those experiences for fans and guests who are going to travel abroad to Paris. So that's in various different capacities. I think what you're going to get and what you can rely on us to provide is an introduction to business. And I think that's the most important thing that you could worry about and expect in your first professional experience. You're going to have to learn good leadership and see it, bad leadership. You're going to have to know the interconnectivity of the businesses. How does a company make money? What's the importance of mission, value, vision? All of those things matter. And I think that's what companies should deliver to new students, and not new students, but students in general. And that's what you should expect. I wouldn't expect, you're not going to, you asked about one of the things that mistakes that students make.
Sure.
I would say sometimes not respecting the journey. That the first job is not going to be your last job. Yeah, it's these are stepping stones, and maybe you join in a marketing capacity, and to your point, realize that it is sales that you enjoy, it is production that you enjoy, and I think it's just realizing that it requires a journey. No one is in a senior leadership position just because they went to school.
Well, a lot of my students think they're going to be, they think they're going to be the GM of whatever team, tomorrow when they graduate. Yeah. So I'll have to let them know that I have backup when I say that's probably not going to be the case, right? I know we're kind of getting closer to the end here, and Neil usually has a good closing question, but I'll ask this before.
Well, you, Dr. Lindsay.
We're at a kind of a crossroads in sport a little bit when it comes to welcomeness, belonging, inclusivity. Mm-hmm. And I do want to ask, just in terms of, from your perspective, like, what is important that students learn, even in school? I teach a race, gender, and diversity course in the sport organization. And sometimes I struggle to get my students to understand the importance of that class. They want to take the marketing class and the communications class because they see the direct applicability of that, right? Like, they know how it's going to apply when they go for jobs, not necessarily the DEIA course, right? So what is so important for young people to know when they go into these organizations in terms of building a culture of inclusivity and welcomingness, and belonging for everybody? What are you seeing, and what is important for them to know?
The easiest way to break it down is, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And understanding that you're going to drive better results by having a team of diverse individuals more so than having a team of like-minded. Imagine being in a room making major decisions with everyone who's like, yep, great idea, I love it, yep. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to turn out a quick result, and you're going to be able to move tomorrow, but I promise you it won't go far. It's those groups and those teams that there's a healthy conflict. There's challenging of thoughts like, hey, that's not really how I see this. And it allows you to create products, experiences, and businesses that are able to deliver better results. So I remember that in my studies of just the importance of the complexity. That is what is going to be longstanding. So I can give you an example from my Microsoft days where I worked in a retail environment. This is back when we were working with Xbox and avatars. Well, the avatar had 8 complexion shades, just 8. We got so much feedback and flack because people didn't feel like they fit in any of those categories. So guess what that meant? We weren't selling a lot. For something as simple as that is I can't even see myself in this avatar. You're telling me I get to make an avatar like myself, but none of these look like me, so therefore I don't want that. The minute they expanded the avatars, sales increased. So it's something as simple as that, is that people did not feel included and therefore it impacted your sales. And at the end of the day, businesses, for-profit businesses, are there to drive increased sales. So it's so important. I implore, it's not about the class, it's about understanding the importance of differing values, views, and experiences. You mix that together and you're sure to deliver a better product.
Callie, I was taking some notes. I like some of your one-liners. I'm going to definitely use them. I think I'm going to end up I'll credit you, but I'm definitely going to end up using some of it in some of my lectures moving forward.
I will tell you the 2 things that I wrote down, and Dr. Lindsay and I have been doing this now. I guess this is our 4th or 5th show together. But I wrote down more on this show than I've written down on any and the 3 things that I wrote down were: 1, have a story.
Yeah.
But the one thing I didn't talk about and I should have talked about was practice your story.
It's so true, because I tell people that about the elevator pitch.
Yep.
Is that in this day and age, you are like mixing and mingling with very senior leaders, and half the time you get around them and you freeze up, versus like, hey, I'm really excited to be here. I had this idea that I'd like people don't know that you gotta land those moments.
Yeah. And the socialization is so important too, because I see it and I'm so grateful to see more diversity in my classrooms, because when I started this, I was mostly just talking to a bunch of men. That was what the classroom looked like. So to see my women in the classroom setting, in still a male prominent setting, speak out more, I mean, that's just going to help so much further, because in socialization ways, like, we don't teach women to do these things and like talk about themselves, right? You're not supposed to talk about yourself, right? So it's practicing that. So I appreciate that, because I think that's so true. And Neil, you're right, practicing it and feeling comfortable and confident in talking about yourself. I gotta be honest, like, people, especially women, we choke up, you know what I mean? Like, we don't always feel comfortable talking about our accomplishments, the things that we're interested and passionate about. So it's important to practice. For sure.
I'm someone probably like you, Dr. Lindsay, who's done a lot of presentations in front of a large group of people. And people frequently ask me, they say to me, you're very comfortable, up on stage talking about different topics. People ask you questions, you're able to respond, things like that. Says, how do you, how did you develop that skill? And I give them one word: because I practice.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I'm going to do a presentation, I practice. And people are amazed to hear that. And I'm like, don't you practice your presentations before you do them? Because
it's funny. I had it in my notes because I answered the questions, and one of the ones about common mistakes, preparation. They're all common behavioral questions. I have researcher interviewers know something about the company, and you must have a question at the end when they say, do you have any questions? So I missed that line, but it's prep. You're so right. Yeah. Have something to say.
I also love when you talk about respecting the journey. I mean, I'm going to just talk about my own daughter for a minute. She's very smart. She's also, my money and my daughter went to the University of Florida. She got her graduate degree there. She was in, like Dr. Lynn, she was in a very male-dominated field. She was in construction. And out of school, got her dream job, and then got her dream promotion, then got her next dream promotion, then got her dream salary. And I mean, everything went Melissa's way. She worked for it, but everything. But what happened all of a sudden when things didn't go her way?
Yeah.
And, when we talk about, Melissa said, I have a lot more respect for the journey now that I have been on than I have ever been. I reached a certain point at 32 She's 37 now. She said, and you know what? The last 3 years have not gone the way I thought they would go.
People look at a career progression and it's just the visual is the ladder. You climb the corporate ladder. And is it Carol? Who made the comment? Sandra, I can't think of her name, but she says it's a jungle gym. This is not a ladder. And especially for women, you've got to realize you climb up, you climb over, you dangle sometimes by your leg. Like that's what it is. But I love what you're saying, Dr. Lindsay, about women in general and celebrating, because you have to learn how to celebrate your own wins in a way that is not self-serving. Right. So you talk about the win, you talk about the team, the people who helped you, but a lot of times people assume, oh, my work will show. They're going to see my work. No, they're going to expect you to continue to work. Right. If you're not able to communicate what you did, what you learned, and what you would do differently, people will just expect you to continue to output.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing consistently, so at the ESPNW Summit, they talked a lot about it from just an investment in women's sports perspective, but it was for men, you invest in the potential. For women, they have to prove their worth already. And that goes for employees too. Women tend to have to prove their resume or their CV. It already has to have been done if a company's going to hire you and invest in you. True. With men, when they hire for the potential, right? But I think that also is because of socialization. Men are more used to telling their story and telling their story in a way that talks to their potential. Women just like to talk about the things they've already done, right? And so that's so important. And I always say this too. I say, for those young women that played sports, what you will learn, and Neil, this is to your point with your daughter, you learn how to fail and take risks and fail. Yep. If you're a softball player, you're going to fail 7 times out of 10 and you're going to be a great hitter. You know what I mean? If I'm playing basketball and it's an air ball one time down the court, but then I, nail a 3, it's like, that's a success, right? But I took another shot. And women and girls aren't taught to fail. We're supposed to be perfect. So I always talk about that too. But those are really, really good points. Those are excellent points. They're empowering.
A number of years ago, I sat and listened to a presentation. Actually, Malcolm Gladwell was one of the keynote speakers, but there was also a gentleman there named Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've encountered Simon. And I think it may be his first book, or it might not have been his first book, but the book was called Why Ask Why. Mm-hmm. And when I first encountered this, I was a vice president already at this company, and so I felt I had pretty good. But you know what? All of a sudden, it made me take a step back and say, you know what? Why ask why? You know what I mean? Why are we doing this the way we're doing it? Why is this happening? Why are we? And Callie, just what you talked about. We weren't diverse around the room. We weren't diverse, gender-wise. We weren't diverse ethnically and racially, and we weren't diverse because we weren't getting, varying opinions. So. I really, what you said, I think really makes a great deal of sense. Callie, on behalf of Dr. Lindsay and I would like to thank you for coming on My First Job in Sports. Hope you've enjoyed the experience. I know Dr. Lindsay and we've enjoyed listening to your experience and your story. So I want to thank you very much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of My First Job in Sports, presented by SBR Net. You can check out the video version on the SBR Net Video Corner on YouTube. You can also catch the audio version on all major podcast platforms. Just search for My First Job in Sports. My First Job in Sports is produced by Brad Mabey. You can connect with us on all social media platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, or check us out at sbrnet.com. Thank you for tuning in.